Season 3 of The Night Agent is now streaming on Netflix. Gabriel Basso reprises his role for the third season of The Night Agent as Peter Sutherland, but this critique is not about him. It's not about the hero, it's about the villain. So stay tuned. Welcome to The Whistle. I'm your host, Jen Whitfield. So who is the villain in Season 3 of The Night Agent? Warning. This episode is full of spoilers, so if you haven't seen The Night Agent, please go watch it. It's a wonderful thriller that is now streaming on Netflix. And if you have, stay tuned because we're going to talk about the villain in this story and most modern spy stories right now. So like most modern spy stories right now, the villain in The Night Agent is not some foreign adversary, which is the common protocol for the genre. It's breaking with a century-old tradition of the enemy being a foreign adversary. The enemy is within. The enemy is within. It's a cabal of corruption and sometimes revolutionaries. In this case, there's not a lot of revolutionaries. It's mostly just a cabal inside the United States of corruption. And so Peter has to take down his own president and find just how deep this path of dark money goes, of corruption, of businessmen, of crooked bankers. That's the villain. The villain is the bank. The villain is the president. The villain is the agents who facilitate these things from happening. And there's a little bit of a Mexican cartel who sells weapons in there. But he's only just one piece of a much broader puzzle. And there's an assassin, but he's hired by none other than the president. So this is new. This is new, but I would dare you to find a modern spy thriller, and I watch all of them, where the enemy is not your own government. And this is across just about every story. I'm not going to rattle them off. I'm not going to name all the thrillers because then I'm just going to give away the endings of a bunch of them. So I'm going to keep it to The Night Agent. But this same concept, the enemy, is no longer some foreign government, it is breaking with a centuries-old tradition of spy novels as the genre. Genres don't break from the rules. And the rule is you establish an external enemy to reinforce who the good guys are. That's how genres work. So the purpose of the spy novel is to establish the good guys from the bad guys. It establishes a narrative. And this will change from country to country. Like if you read a Russian spy novel, they're not going to be the villains. They're the hero. But when you watch or read a spy story made in the US or a Western ally, the enemy is not the Americans. It's going to be, historically, it has been another country. And that's how all spy novels typically work. As a genre, it's been around for about a century. I mean, technically before that, but it didn't really become a really popular genre until the beginning of the 20th century, in the Edwardian times. Some literary experts say that Duckworth-Drew by William Le Queux, Secrets of the Foreign Office, is considered by some the first spy novel. Other literary experts will say much earlier in the 18th century, 19th century, 1830s, they were American. But one thing they've always had in common, the enemy has changed, but one thing they've always had in common is that it was someone outside of the States, or outside of the country that the story takes place in. Like British spy novels, it's someone outside. If you follow historically who the villain is, it will evolve around, or it'll coalesce around a particular group depending on who the perceived enemy is of the time. So for a while it was the Germans. For a while there was anti-immigration sentiment. Revolutionaries, the French. Revolutionaries during the Marxist period from communist era. Agitators. And then, of course, during the Cold War, there were tons of spy stories in the Western countries amongst the Allies where it was the Russians. It was a KGB agent who was trying to infiltrate the US. They had to stop some kind of covert operation. Actually, the first James Bond movie, it's a combination of the Chinese and the Russians, mostly Chinese. And then after that, it's pretty much all KGB, the Russians. And then there's another period. So after the fall of the Berlin Wall, that's not the enemy, and it changes. And so when you watch those spy thrillers, it's a lot of rogue terrorists. There's Europeans. It tends to coalesce around who we think the enemy is at the time. And then, of course, post 9/11, it's all terrorists. And now the war on terror is, I guess, over. I'm not sure who won. I don't think it was us. But now who's the enemy? It's not an external country. I can't remember the last time I watched a spy thriller where I didn't expect the enemy to be someone inside, even if it starts out as being like the Wagner Group, which has been a really common thing. I know that by the end of the story, it's going to be someone inside the government, some cabal of conspiracy that created either a bunch of revolutionaries who want to start some kind of radical movement within the government, or tech people and corruption and wealth and banks and billionaires. That's been the enemy in almost every spy story of the last couple years. So not only is the enemy almost always within, but it's getting really complicated. In a lot of stories, it's about, like if you think of early James Bond stories, it's about the spy tracking down the enemy and defeating them. It's not hard to figure out who it is. In this, or who, sometimes he has to figure out who's on his side and who's not, because the KGB had so many inside agents. That was part of their thing. But the stories are getting really complex. So The Night Agent Season 3, we have quite a few different characters. Most of the characters didn't come back. So Peter has to untangle, with the help of a journalist, the flow of dark money. The flow of dark money and super PACs, which is extremely relevant. And in the end, of course, the president is corrupt. And his wife. Actually, it was his wife. It was his wife doing it for them. And flowing money through these agents. We're in the Epstein era. I would expect to see more of this. This just makes it extremely relevant. We have this complicated shadow network of politicians who are deeply corrupt, who are working with people who move money, with crooked banks. And you don't even know who's hired the assassin that's hunting them. And we have a series of crooked politicians throughout this story. And it evolves. And mostly this journalist is trying to track the money and figure out who's funneling this money through. And they use these complicated network of shell corporations to hide their evil deeds. And you can't actually tell who's doing what. And when you get to the real story, it's hard to explain in a way that people understand and care. It's complicated. And that's what we're doing right now. We're unraveling these complicated Epstein files. So we come to stories for a variety of reasons. And one of those reasons is cathartic. We come there for therapy. We want to feel something. We seek comfort, especially when we're talking about a genre. So there's a specific feeling. So if we're talking about a spy thriller, it starts out with our fears. Our fears are laid bare of who we're afraid of. And then by the end, you find some sense of comfort, of peace, of safety, because the good guys win. We win over the fear of who the bad guy is. There's a hero. He has to be victorious. But that changes. That sense of comfort and peace, you often don't really get it in most stories. There's not much of a resolution lately in these stories. It's kind of scary, actually. They start out with actually more of a sense of, I believe my institutions. They'll start out with patriots who signed up to protect their government. And by the end, they're now less safe. So we're in this weird period of the genre where it's like the reverse of safety. We start out thinking we can trust things, and then by the end we don't. And I think we need to analyze what that says about us as people. Why is that the common thread now? What does that say? What does that mean? So when there is a hero, it's someone that has the courage to stand up to their own government, who's willing to sacrifice themselves, they're willing to go to jail, they're willing to paint themselves as a target by a corrupt government that's going to come after them. So if we're looking for a hero, the hero, and so in this case, Peter Sutherland stands up to his government. In this case, he stands up to his own president. And he has this complicated cabal of bad guys that he goes after. He follows the money with the journalist. They're seeking truth. And he finds out that he can't trust anybody. Right? And that says something. The stories we tell say something about our psyche. It tells you something about where we're at, how we think, how we feel. What does this say? What does this say? One of the biggest fronts right now that's recognized is the US versus the US. It's not some external enemy. It's internal. It has a lot to do with tech companies, but there's this deep division and mistrust amongst citizens against each other. And that's reflected in our art. When the writers are establishing who are we the most afraid of, it's not outside. There's not a huge enemy, even on the brink of World War III. Who is more afraid of Russia right now than the bank, than the internal corrupt politicians? I mean, we're afraid of all these things, right? But it's all connected now, and that's reflected in our storytelling. And the really weird part is, writers often tell stories with this predictive quality to them. Prior to COVID, there were writers who predicted COVID in their storytelling, and it really haunted them. And prior to the terrorist attacks, there were writers who told stories almost identically, and it haunted them. And there's this predictive quality where we tap into the psyche and our fear of where we're headed. And what is it predicting? It's predicting a civil war. Or at the very least, it's predicting this huge level of corruption that needs to get taken down by someone internally, by someone willing to stand up. That's today's episode. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe for more content just like this. See you next time.